Christmas Eve Lyft ride nightmare. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll tell you another time. It was Christmas Eve 2020. I was running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It was a pickup from this kind of lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive and I find my passenger, and he has all his belongings, several boxes of stuff. Now my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all his stuff loaded up, barely, and are on our way. During the ride, he's crying, saying his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had walked in on him earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because it was her name on the lease, so I was taking him to a hotel. Now, in my city, we have a street that is well known for having vices, hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels, the works. We get to the motel. He asked me to wait for him to check in and get his key. No problem, man, I said. I'll confess, I break the rules a little when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in my concealed holster secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people have tried to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of other things. But like I said, another time. This motel was on that street I mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passing out against the building. And I'm a big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level, so to help the guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I start to help him unload his stuff. While on my second trip getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came to the room I was next to, not my passenger. One of the ladies pounded on the door, then opened it. That's when I saw the guy raise a freaking shotgun up out of his long coat and storm into the room. The two ladies followed his, slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas. And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice he took the boxes out of my hands or slide a $5 in my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could get my gun. I know the guy and both ladies saw me, and I know they knew I saw the gun. I had to get out of there. No witnesses. I got in my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops. I give them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out of Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found out the gunman or the woman. They never answered the door I saw them come out of, and the occupants of the room they went into said nothing had happened, and that I was full of shit. Well, I know what I saw, so to the gunman I saw with the shotgun, who I'm sure was making a statement to someone about a debt, let's not meet again. Christmas and a corpse. Okay, so I've known for a while I wanted to submit this story, but felt odd about it since I'm still friends with some of this guy's family and would feel like a total shitbag if it was seen. However, I've been home with the kids reading today and getting pissed that I read all your stories and was fresh out of creepy material. So be part of the solution, I guess. Here we go. I'm a member of the slam poetry scene. Basically, it's an excuse to get people to listen to performance poetry by adding a competitive element to things. After running through the small scene in my city and wanting to branch out and push my career further, I started visiting places within driving distance that I could spit. This led me to Charlotte, NC. I started at their local team venue where you can compete to be part of a squad that goes to a national competition every single year. I was doing well and was accepted into the local crew pretty readily. This led to longer stays and features at some of the other venues in the city. I started going to one that was particularly popular and good for selling CDs. That's where I met him. He was working at a bar back. Occasionally got on stage and shared frankly shitty poems. He was the brother of the host and everyone knew and liked him. He started flirting with me more and more. Although in my loose days, searching for acceptance and love everywhere, something always kept me leery. I'd readily accept the drinks he sent over, smoke his weed with the group in the stockroom between sets, and hang out at parties and events. I always had the tickle in my gut warning me not to get too close. but over a year or two, we continued to become friends. After a while, he started texting and calling more often, poking me on Facebook daily, sending messages about wanting to be more than friends, that he wanted to find a snow bunny and settle down. Again, I never entertained it. There was something gnawing at me, the crazy in his eyes, too hard to miss. I eventually moved to Denver to take a position teaching poetry and work at a friend's law firm. The second Christmas I was there, I got the call. A friend from Charlotte relayed the following. He had found his white girl and had gotten married. They seemed happy at first, but slowly began fighting more and more. It spilled over into the venue, and often they had to be separated by friends from physically attacking one another in public. One friend, later thinking back, remembers the last time he saw them together, him pushing his wife, followed by her throwing a drink in his face and scratching his neck deep enough to draw blood. She said after the couple had been dragged away from each other, she sat with him and smoked a cigarette. She says she laughed and said, "You guys are going to kill each other." Around Christmas last year, his wife stopped coming to the bi-weekly events that they both attended regularly. He explained it away that they were on a break. Time goes by. No one really questions that they hadn't seen or heard from her in a while, thinking she was breaking from the whole scene in order to put distance between herself and her husband. Her parents, however, hadn't heard from their daughter since the Thanksgiving dinner. They would call him. He would say everything was fine and blow them off. This continues until a week after Christmas, knowing their daughter would never miss a holiday without at least a phone call. They call the police, send them to the couple's home for a well body check. The cops arrive, knock on the door, and are let in. They ask him where she is. He replies she's in the bedroom. He shows them to the room, and there she lay, dead for weeks, rotting in their bed. Oh, and he killed her little dog too. During this time, he had been attending events, hosting hip-hop nights, even publishing a blog on making a marriage work on one of his local organization sites, never once letting on that every night he was going home and sleeping with his murdered wife. The sickest part of it all, he has a child from another relationship, a daughter whom he gets to celebrate every other holiday with. That Christmas, they opened gifts, had dinner, cuddled up on the couch, and watched movies less than 100 feet from her decaying stepmother. I don't know what would have happened if I'd ever taken him up on his offer to date, but I do know me and my gut are going to stay on speaking terms, and I will always listen. Creepy Christmas encounter in the forest. First post here, this just happened about 1 hour ago, so my memory is fresh. First off, I live in a a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses, but close to the highway. You can drive there within maybe 5 minutes, and also about 10 minutes away from the town. If you cross the street, it just takes you about 10 minutes to walk to reach the forest. First Christmas Day, in the afternoon, my partner and I decided to go for a little digestive walk, as we were really stuffed from all the food. It was about 5 p.m. and already dark when we left, and we had a big and bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road towards the forest and then turn right, following a small graveled cycle track close to the forest border, which connects our village and maybe the next 15 to 20 minute walk between villages. In the middle part of the track, you have to walk through a small bit of forest. It's rather dark and the trees are very high and quite dense. When we entered, I saw our flashlight reflecting on something and recognized the car being parked there on the side of the track, close to the trees. This struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive there and the path is very narrow and hidden, so I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside of the car and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so it must have been parking there for quite a while. A bit in front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it so I could better focus and photograph with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner told me, there is someone standing behind us in the middle of the road. He's looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally, because at this time in the evening and close to the border of the forest, there are boars sometimes, and it's mating season, so they're more aggressive than usual. Indeed, there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's reach. He just wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing it. At first, I thought he might be startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone was just taking photos around your car. I decided to get up and confront him from a distance, explaining to him that I was just taking photos of that tree. He didn't react and still just stood there. I went on to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that it wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure about there being a normal explanation for his behavior. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to get out of there and follow the path leading to the next village. It was maybe 5 to 7 minutes until we reached it. I remember the letters on his license plates and Googled it, and turned out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is in a very strict lockdown right now, so you're only allowed to travel even by car if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest. Turning around and going back inside, I was able to see that he parked there again and turned the lights off. He didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than we had initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way, and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then, but I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all the details. Big regret, I didn't memorize the whole license plate though. I think I was very lucky to have my partner and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I was alone. So, creepy guy sneaking around in the forest. Let's not meet. I was almost cooked alive. When I was 10 years old, my family and I went to visit my grandmother for winter break. My cousin came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandma dropped us off and said she would come pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I'd never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could find time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads down into the water. We did this a couple times and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won, but instead it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off or she would ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool anyways, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. We got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course we were super excited she was allowing us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass, and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock. Probably helped make sure you were not there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I knew she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot, and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I turned the knob on the door, but it still wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't open it either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking and twisting the knob to get the lifeguard's attention. attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't know if there's any way she couldn't have heard or noticed two little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now that we had been there for about 25 minutes, it was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they made it a little damp and it was easier to breathe with it. I was so worried about my cousin, as she is a couple years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed to get out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I wanted to go sit back down, but the wooden sweats on the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so it didn't burn as bad, and I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with a towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out as soon as possible because she was feeling a little disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now, and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget us. I thought she would come back soon, but there was this little voice in my head telling me that she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool for some reason. I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire. I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to let into the sauna and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back in. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think they want out. The lifeguard let out a sigh, opened the door fully, and we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We had only about 10 minutes before my grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what had just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or in the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner, and I told them the story of what just happened. They thought I must have been exaggerating and didn't believe me. I truly think that that woman was trying to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. Was that her endgame? I'm 21 now, but I think about this interaction all the time, and when I'm in small spaces or if I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one believes the story, and I get it, it's pretty absurd. But do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding? Or do you think that she really left us in there to die? And why? So, to the lifeguard of the YMCA, please, let's not meet again.